Well, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Burns. I'm the co-director of the University of Kansas Alzheimer's Disease Research Center in Kansas City, and I'm the clinical core director and part of the clinical core steering committee for the ADRCs. And I want to welcome you to this webinar on researching new models of dementia care, which is, I think, a hot topic and one that I think could importantly benefit from more collaboration and sharing of best practices. So this was something that the Clinical Core Steering Committee thought was important, and it's also something that I think the NIH thinks is important, as evidenced by including care models and sort of introducing the idea of adding cores to NIA P30 Alzheimer's disease research centers that focus on this. And so the Clinical Core Steering Committee thought this would be a good topic. And we're now using this new format that we've learned so well through the pandemic to bring us all together and try to really stimulate new research in this area. So hence this 1 hour series of presentations. We're going to get 4 presentations from 4 leaders in the area who are doing research on dementia care models. And we'll hear what they've been doing some of them over the last decade or more. So this is something I'm particularly interested in because as a clinic director and somebody who's been trying to grow clinical care here at the University of Kansas, we actually in the last year and a half have established a dementia care model that we call the Cognitive Care Network that we're growing. And so we're sort of new to the field. And so I was very interested in pulling this together to kind of hear what are the leaders doing and can we then establish a way to collaborate and share practices. So that's sort of the intro. We've got four speakers: Kate Possin, Jim Law, Jeff Williamson, and Mary Mittelman. And we're going to start with Kate. So Katherine Possin is from the University of California, San Francisco. She's the John Douglas French Alzheimer's Foundation Endowed Professor there and has been doing work in this area, impressive work in this area for some time. So I'll turn it over to Kate. Kate, I think you're muted.
All right, I think I can get it going now. Let's see. All right, I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Are you seeing my slides?
Yeah, the care ecosystem slide.
Okay, great. So you see the full slide.
Yes.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's really an honor to get to be on this panel today and share some of our results from the care ecosystem, which is a supportive care program for people with dementia and their families. So I think as probably most people in the audience today are well aware, dementia care is too often crisis-oriented and fragmented. There are frequent emergency department visits and hospitalizations, multiple care transitions, inappropriate and potentially harmful medication use. We see aggressive end-of-life care that's often inconsistent with the patient's values. And while we know that dementia shortens lives, its greatest impact is really on quality of life for people with dementia and their caregivers. There's a lot of reason to focus on the caregiver when thinking about better dementia care. Poor caregiver health is so we found that caregiver depression is associated with increase in rates of emergency room use by the person with dementia. And also the Levinson lab at Berkeley has found that poor caregiver mental health predicts shorter patient survival, controlling for patient variables and caregiver physical health. So there's a large and growing body of rigorous research, including by other members of this panel, that demonstrates that care management programs and caregiver support interventions benefit patients and families. And some of these programs have even demonstrated healthcare cost reductions or that they are cost neutral, which is so important when you consider that dementia is the most expensive healthcare condition to Medicare. So when we were launching the Care Ecosystem Project with a CMMI Healthcare Innovations Award that we got in 2014, this paper was published that had a big impact on me by Laura Gitlin. And she talked about how there were more than 200 dementia caregiver interventions that have been tested and found to be efficacious, but few programs had been translated for delivery. And so they were inaccessible to the families living with dementia. So as we were designing the care ecosystem back in 2014, we kept our eyes focused on trying to design a model that would be truly scalable, because it wouldn't be a big contribution to the field just to find another effective program if it didn't actually reach families. And I believe that scientists have a critical role in bridging this gap between science and practice. We need to understand why the gap exists between caregiver interventions that we know are effective and healthcare practice by working with health system leaders and policymakers. So I'll take you through the story of the care ecosystem, starting with our iterative development of the care model, the controlled research that we have done and is still ongoing, some work on implementation science, and always thinking about scale. We had to design our care model quite rapidly. We had our CMMI award was a 3-year award, so we needed to refine our care model and test it in an RCT very quickly. So we gathered input from primary care providers, from family caregivers via focus groups, as well as satisfaction surveys from our early enrollees. We interviewed our own staff, the frontline care team navigators and other clinical team members to get their input on what was working, what could be improved. And we very quickly, iteratively refined our care model during this time before arriving what's been a fairly stable model ever since. In our care model, the care team navigator is paired with patient caregiver dyads. Each care team navigator has a caseload ranging from 50 to 90 of these dyads. And they have a relationship that they develop over the phone. And when the patient or caregiver, usually the caregiver, has a concern or issue that arises around the dementia, they can call the care team navigator, who will either address the problem themselves or triage as needed to other members of the dementia specialist team, coordinate care with other healthcare providers. We don't sitting healthcare. And of course, always thinking about available community resources. So a care team navigator is somebody who's empathic, organized, likes working with people. They don't have to have a healthcare background. I think all of our navigators so far have had a bachelor's degree, and many have gone on to pursue careers in geriatrics, in nursing, psychology. The care team navigator is trained, supervised, and supported by an expert clinical team. And I think that's critical, that there is that dementia expertise on the team. And the navigator provides that telephone-based care, education, and support. And we found that our caregivers really value their relationships with their care team navigator. I was very pleased to learn that even, so I think that speaks to that the training program and the system of triaging has worked pretty well. We organize our care in 4 major care modules. We focus on medications. A pharmacist reviews every new patient's medications when they're first enrolled into the program. And we try to make sure that families are able to access the medications they need. And we try to reduce unnecessary and inappropriate medications. We support the caregiver and provide personalized education when that education is needed. For example, if a new behavior arises, we provide education about strategies to manage that behavior at that time. We have a decision-making module that's focused on planning ahead for medical, legal, and financial issues in dementia. And we have a real focus on behaviors indeed. I think I think we've learned that behaviors are really a topic that many caregivers struggle so much with, and it's an area where our navigators can provide a lot of help. During COVID, we've added a new protocol, our shelter-in-place support protocol, where we find that our program is even more important during this time when caregivers are even more isolated and may not be getting to their other healthcare providers as often. So we're giving extra attention to our families during this time. I'm going to share the results from our randomized clinical trial that we polled participants throughout California, Nebraska, and Iowa. We enrolled both the person with dementia and their primary caregiver. And our care and our research was delivered in 3 languages. In our clinical trial, after recruitment, we did an outcome survey and then randomized participants 2-to-1 to the treatment or usual care. Those enrolled to the treatment would be assigned a care team navigator and would receive the care protocols. The order and dosage of the care protocols is personalized. We do an outcome survey at 6 months and 12 months. You can see in the usual care group, they receive the same outcome surveys. We reported the results from this 12-month trial, and I'll show you the results in a moment. But we're actually continuing this study now in about half the sample, all the way up to 5 years, so we can look at the long-term impact of this care model. So these are the locations of our participants that are enrolled. Because this program is all phone-based, we are able to reach patients and families wherever they live, including rural areas. And the results that we have reported are that the care ecosystem has been shown to improve caregiver well-being, including depression and caregiver burden, patient quality of life, and also reduce emergency room visits. Talita Rosa worked with an economist at UCSF and looked at the costs of setting up and providing the care ecosystem. And I think one of the important findings in her paper is that the costs really vary quite a bit by case. Here, since she's done her work, we've gone up to higher caseloads, but still we think the ideal caseload for an experienced navigator is between about 60 and 90 dyads. We have had the pleasure of working with a number of health systems around the country who have been interested and have successfully implemented the care ecosystem. They all have needed some sort of funding to launch their program. I think launching any new care program does take some funding. One of the programs, Oxner, has recently done an analysis and showed that they were able to replicate our finding of reducing ED visits. So we're always thinking about scale. If you want to learn more about the care ecosystem, we provide everything you'd want to know, everything you think you'd want to know at this webpage here. So we have a whole training program, about 60 short training videos for care team navigators to get them up to speed with the program. We have our educational materials, often in more than one language. We have our care protocols. We have a toolkit that's designed for health system leaders. So we hope that this supports health systems in launching or adapting the care ecosystem. So in closing, I'll just end with 2 quotes from people I admire a lot in the field. These treatments and care practices will neither prevent nor cure Alzheimer's or other dementias, but they will help to change the experience of people with the conditions and their family caregivers, helping them to manage and cope with the difficult situations caused by the conditions and live as well as possible despite them. Our nation can and should do more to help family caregivers provide care in the home to their loved ones who suffer from dementia. Building a system of care requires excellent science and engineering, but we also need creative approaches that design systems of care that are available nationwide because they are scalable and affordable. Most importantly, families need our help now, and we need to move faster. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Kate. just a reminder, we are gonna have time for discussion at the end of the 4 talks. So put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. But there is one really quick question. It sounds like Kate, for you, relevant to the specifics of your talk, and it's your usual care group. What did they get? What was administered for that group? Is your band?
You know, my internet was a little unstable. Was the question, what was administered for?
Usual care group.
Oh, great question. Yeah, so yeah, it wasn't a very active control group, but what we did do, there was a few small things that we did. So, you know, if we learned about that the caregiver was depressed during our survey calls, we would have a nurse connect with them and connect them with resources. We send a quarterly newsletter to our survey of care participants. We send the patient and the caregiver birthday cards to connect with the program. We offer some payment for completing surveys. So there's a little bit of activity with the usual care, but I wouldn't call it an active control group.
Great. All right. Okay, thanks. All right, we'll move on to James Law from Emory University. And Jim is an associate professor and is the director of the cognitive neurology program and vice chair in the Department of Neurology there, and leads the clinical core of the ADRC. So welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this program. It's really very cool to hear what else is going on. And I'm going to tell you about what we've been doing the last couple of years. The thing that I will wind up describing is something that we've come to call the Georgia Memory Net. It's a statewide initiative, so it's not, strictly speaking, a research program, and was originally designed really as a clinical care program. But the genesis of this really is what we all recognize, that everywhere we look, there are enormous gaps in how we manage patients with Alzheimer's and other dementing disorders. Some numbers which I think are pretty comparable nationally is that up to 2/3 of patients living with dementing illnesses never get a specific diagnosis. When they do, the diagnosis may be delayed by many years. And there are enormous disparities among people of color in terms of both the prevalence and the care and management of dementing illnesses. There's very limited access to diagnostic expertise in many places in the country. There is too little support for aging in place and psychosocial and community services, and the financial costs to the state and to the nation as a whole, both Medicaid costs, the differential in caring for dementia patients versus non-demented patients, and the costs associated with unnecessary admissions for Medicare and Alzheimer's and dementia patients is huge. So potentially an enormous amount of savings. And I put this slide up, and for those of you who don't recognize it, these are the results from Biogen's recent study of Aducanumab. And in addition to showing the fairly dramatic reduction in elimination of amyloid pathology, which we've known about for close to 2 decades now, this is the first drug in late trials, in phase 3 trials, that actually appeared to show a slowing, a blunting of cognitive and functional decline in individuals who received active drug versus placebo. So we are literally on the precipice of disease-modifying therapeutics. And so one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is what happens? So this is in front of the FDA right now, seeking approval for regular clinical use. So what happens if FDA approves Aducanumab? Are we ready for this? There are a number of questions that make some of the current limitations in our care systems drastically inadequate. Who will be eligible for this drug? We know that this strategy, the anti-amyloid strategy, is not effective in patients who are already mild or moderately demented. It's almost certainly going to be limited to people with mild cognitive impairment. Moreover, it will not just be a clinical diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. I'm betting that the requirement for the drug will include etiologic diagnosis of underlying Alzheimer's disease. And there are very practical issues related to drug delivery that, as a monthly IV infusion and cost. So how prepared are we for dealing with not just our current challenges, the inadequate support for persons living with dementia and their families, but how prepared are we for the challenges that we've been looking for, that we've been hoping for as better therapeutics come online? So those things that I've already mentioned, the failure of early recognition, specificity of diagnosis, become critically important. And so this gets me to the Georgia Memory Net, which is what I want to describe. And I have to give you a little bit of background on this. The Georgia Memory Net is really designed based on 20 plus years of our approach at Emory in how we viewed our clinical care and our research enterprise as being really artificially separated. And Sheila Humberstone, who was a state government lobbyist. I think lobbyists have a bad image in many of our minds, and she's a good case in point. Sheila's mother developed early onset Alzheimer's disease and died at the age of 66 in 2012. And prior to her death, Alan Levy was the one who finally gave her an accurate diagnosis, took care of her until she died. Sheila has worked tirelessly in the state government to advance the needs of Alzheimer's, both in terms of understanding disease better and for caring for patients and their families. And through her efforts and the inestimable interpersonal skills of Dr. Levy, they had made lots of partners and created allies within state government. And eventually this led to, in 2017, Governor Nathan Deal signing into the state budget $4.1 million, which is a recurring item in the state budget to support the Georgia Alzheimer's Project. The gentlemen on the left and right is Terry England and Jack Hill, who are chairs of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. And all three are Republicans. And this is a case where the science and the care needs related to a disease unlike COVID did not become politicized, in large measure because both Terry and Jack had the unfortunate experience of caring for family members with Alzheimer's disease, both of whom received care in our clinics at Emory. And they were instrumental in getting this legislation passed and the budget approved. And then since the approval, we have also had the great benefit of working with incredible partners in state government. Robin Crittenden is the commissioner for the Department of Human Services, and Abby leads the Division of Aging Services. And we have worked hand in hand with them as we have pursued this project. And so what is the Georgia Memory Net? What have we done here? And we have done this with an incredible team. And the folks that I'm showing here are on the left are some of the administrative leadership with whom this could not work. So Rebecca has been our program director. Sean is actually a consultant with a company that has worked with us every step of the way to develop the infrastructure for this. Lindsay Preiser and Ted Johnson lead the primary care core. Laura Metters and Ken Hepburn, who is the director of our ORCOR here, have led the development of something called the Community Services Core. And then David Loring, who's an excellent neuropsychologist, and Chad Hales, who's an outstanding behavioral neurologist, have led the development of the Memory Assessment Clinic. And I'll just spend a couple of seconds describing each one of those components separately. This also could not happen without incredible partnerships and collaborations statewide to effect the various components. And there are really several key pillars of this if we want to improve care for patients statewide. One of those is the recognition that we don't have the capacity as specialists or subspecialists to carry out this, to execute this goal. And so we have made a concerted effort from the very beginning and allocated specific budget to primary care engagement and education to reach out to primary care providers throughout the state. We've made an early focus on educating on the use of the annual wellness visit as an early screening and detection instrument by primary care physicians. The development of the statewide memory assessment clinic networks I'll describe to you, but the idea here is to disseminate what patients, what Terry and Jack and their families found so beneficial about receiving their care at Emory was related to the expertise and services and the multidisciplinary approach that we have implemented. And that's not really available everywhere in the state, and so we need to disseminate this. We also needed to develop a process by which we could engage the available resources in the community, the state agencies that are available to serve the citizens of the state. And we wanted to monitor project activities and outcomes. For about 25 years now, we have actively worked to capture our clinical data in database forms where the data were accessible and could be used to advance research activities. And that has been an integral part of our design and planning for the Georgia Memory Net. In terms of the primary care outreach, we are in the phases of dissemination, and we have developed a number of educational materials and packets, a welcome kit to the Georgia Memory Net for PCPs, targeted educational material, and advertising campaigns. I don't have time to show you these, but we've partnered with a branding and marketing firm that's just done a wonderful job of developing materials for advertising, targeting both the primary care physicians, but also patients and families to expand awareness, both of the annual wellness visit and also increasing the recognition statewide of the availability and resources that they can access through the Georgia Memory Net. The community services educators is really a key element to the whole thing. We give each of our regional memory assessment clinics a budget each year, and the only thing that they are required to spend in their budget for an earmarked expense is to support a full-time community services educator. So this is somebody who plays something like a social work role, but he or she does not need to be a social worker, does not even really, as Katherine was saying, does not even need to really be in the healthcare field at all. But they play a critical role in connecting patients and families to community support. They are trained to develop individualized care plans that they can then share directly with area agencies on aging, which are represented in every one of the 54 or 57 counties in the state of Georgia, and then to continue to monitor how the patients and families have been served and what the outcomes look like. The biggest lift, so we began this process, the budget was approved on May 1st, 2017. The budget year starts in July 1. And so before the budget year even started, we worked very hard to engage a number of other academic centers around the state. So the other medical schools in Georgia are the Medical College of Georgia, Augusta University, Mercer School of Medicine, and Morehouse School of Medicine. And in order to bypass some of the time delays that would come with contracting, we reached out directly to our colleagues in these academic health centers in order to identify appropriate locations that are geographically distributed around the state. And so in the first year of funding, we stood up 5 regional memory assessment clinics. And with the exception of the location in Augusta, the other sites are largely, the providers are family medicine physicians, geriatricians. The location in Albany and the location, the non-Emory location in Atlanta, are largely directed by nurse practitioners. Each location has a psychometric technician and the community services educator that I mentioned. There is Chad and David are spearheading continued on-site and remote training activities, because we realize that it will take years to develop the full expertise that these folks will need to provide the expert assessments. And then importantly, we have implemented standardized assessment collections across all of the sites. So every location is collecting standard instruments, including some that many of you will recognize, the Functional Activities Questionnaire. They all conduct a standardized cognitive assessment that can be shared. So the process is intended to be integrated with a full loop with the initiation of referrals based on referrals from the primary care physicians to the memory assessment clinics. It's intended as a 2-visit evaluation. During the second visit, in addition to receiving diagnosis and care plans, community services educator develops a fully developed care plan and communicates that information to the area agencies on aging as well as the primary care providers. And then we continue to monitor centrally how the process is working. So we hope that the outcome of this project, this is 2 years now plus, is that we will achieve the goal of providing earlier and more accurate diagnosis, provide greater education and support to families and patients, and then deliver more effective therapies and be in a position to take better advantage of the emerging therapeutics. And I mentioned that we had implemented standardized design. This is a busy slide, so I'm not going to try and walk you through it. But from the beginning, we implemented an integrated information management system across the entire statewide network. And this has been built into something called the Georgia MemoryNet portal. And Sean Sudduth, that I showed you, has really led and helped us to navigate this entire process. In the next iteration, it will include HL7 compatibility so that we can save time and improve the efficiency of the operation of the clinics. All of the data is captured. We have data use agreements with all of the institutions and health systems. And this we expect to become an enormous repository that will support outcomes research as well as medical economic outcomes. And we are actively performing reporting and oversight. We have to report to the state on an annual basis to report on the success of the state investment. So we're in early days, but in a couple of years, we have stood up what we think is going to be a tremendously beneficial system to improve the access and diagnosis for patients and families throughout the state of Georgia. And if we're successful, hopefully we can share this with others and help you convince your state legislatures to be as progressive and forward-thinking as Georgia's legislature has been. So thanks very much.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Jim. All right. Now we're moving on to Jeff Williamson. This is the third of 4 speakers. And Jeff is from Wake Forest. He's a professor in gerontology and geriatric medicine, and he directs the Center for Healthcare Innovation, among multiple other things. So turn it over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. Hopefully you can see my screen there. And I'll try to catch us up a little bit.
Are we seeing it? Am I missing?
How about now?
Here it comes. Yep, got it.
Got it? Okay, great. Well, thanks again, as everyone else has said, thanks for the opportunity. And I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'll see if I can catch us up a little bit. The Dementia Care study is in the theme of what we just heard from the other presenters. It's really an ongoing trial. It's currently in the field right now. I'll give you at the very end a little idea about where we are in terms of recruitment, but it's supported under the PCORI mechanism jointly with the NIA. And so it's great to have seen these collaborations move forward very well. I'm trying to figure out how to move my slide forward here as well. Here we go. The goal of the trial is to compare the effectiveness and really the cost effectiveness of 2 primary interventions with a control group, community-based intervention versus a health system-based intervention, and to compare those to an enhanced usual care, primarily focused on caregiver support for a person, caregivers who are taking care of persons with dementia who are still living in the community at home or in an assisted living facility. It's a pragmatic randomized trial, 4 clinical sites that I'll show you in just a moment, representing different geographic regions of the country and different types of healthcare organizations. Basically, as I've already said, it's a pragmatic trial, 18 months in duration in terms of how long the participants are enrolled in the trial. There's a sample size of 2,150 people, with 1,000 people in each intervention group, and then 150 in the usual care group. And you can see the inclusion criteria listed there. Community dwelling, as I've said, diagnosis of dementia already in the electronic record. This could be an Alzheimer's dementia or related dementia, either English or Spanish speaking, and have a partnering physician who is willing to help their participants enroll. These are the clinical sites in the coordinating center. As you can tell, Wake Forest Health System is one site, the Geisinger Health System is another, Baylor Scott and White, and the University of Texas at Galveston. Those make up the 4 health systems that are testing the question under the guidance of the two coordinating centers, a clinical coordinating center based at UCLA, and then a data coordinating center based at Yale. How the recruitment is going, recruitment for this trial is moving more and more into a pragmatic approach as well, screening the electronic health record, and from that, tying that screening to a particular practice, generating a list of patients in that practice who have dementia, asking the physicians or the advanced practice providers to review those lists, and then identifying that dyad, the caregiver and the person with dementia, and they're contacted together. Participants may also self-refer, or caregivers can. And then, especially with COVID, we've moved increasingly to a telephone or an in-person eligibility determination with a consent in the telephone. All the IRBs have approved that. And then baseline measures also can be collected either in person or by phone. Here are the 3 arms of the trial. There's a health system-based intervention. And so this is to reflect the encapsulated healthcare management of people by a nurse practitioner or a PA who is a trained dementia care manager. They're trained in the model, the UCLA model that Kate talked about a little bit earlier. So the patients assigned to that arm are managed within the healthcare system in conjunction with their primary care provider. There's a community-based partner with the primary care where these caregivers and patients are randomized, randomly assigned to a local community-based organization that's trained according to the Benjamin Rose Institute model of a baseline contact and then a monthly contact with the caregiver to help that caregiver as the person with dementia goes through the various stages of change, help link them to community resources in that community. And then there's an enhanced the community care model that's it's not nothing, as they say down here, I guess, but it's linking those people to the National Alzheimer's Association caregiver support line. Basically, the primary outcome is really focused on the caregiver. It's the NPIQ severity and the MCSI, so looking at stress and strain of the caregivers and seeing which of these interventions is most effective. They've already been tested individually against control groups, but now we're looking at them head-to-head to see which one of these is the most effective. And even our hope is that both of them will show that they're effective, of course, relative to the control group. And then these caregiver support systems can be adapted to the community in which people live. Medicare is at the table. Sherry Ling, many of you know from Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has been an active participant in terms of helping the trial with its design and implementation. And at some point, the hope is that Medicare will be able to cover some of the cost of this, perhaps with reducing some of the more acute, intensive end-of-life services, again, as Kate mentioned earlier. There's also an analysis looking at a variety of heterogeneous kinds of treatment effects based on patient function, caregiver qualities, et cetera, and I won't go through those now. Secondary outcomes are looking at caregiver self-efficacy and depressive symptoms in the caregiver. And then we have a number of exploratory outcomes that are looking at the quality of life for the actual person with dementia, mortality, caregiver satisfaction. The goal attainment survey is embedded in this trial, looking at functional status changes, nursing home use, and then at the very end, you'll see an emerging, I think, a more important outcome that we're exploring is days spent at home, according to which model the caregiver and person dementia were assigned to. There's also, as I mentioned at the beginning, a cost effectiveness analysis looking at what are the incremental Medicare and Medicaid costs for each arm of the trial relative to the usual care arm, and then also looking at out-of-pocket costs for the participant and the caregiver as well. This is my last slide. That really just shows where we are as of the end of last month. We've enrolled 744 individuals. I don't really have a pointer, I think, that I can show you. Maybe I'm trying to do that, but you can see almost toward the bottom, 744 individuals have been randomized. We screen about 3.5 people, 3 people. That's getting closer to 3 now to enroll 1. These folks are, ill, but there's a broad range. There's a bell curve of people in the late stages of MCI and in the early to middle stages of dementia trying to live at home in the community with the caregiver. We've had 37 deaths as at the end of last month in the people that we've recruited. So I think that's my last slide, and there'll be time hopefully for questions. I want to make sure that Mary gets her time as well in here, and I'll stop right there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Great. Yeah, we'll move on to our last speaker, and then we should have 10 minutes or so for some discussion. So this is Mary. So put your questions in, but Mary Mittelman from NYU, who is a research professor in the Department of Psychiatry, and she runs the psychosocial core for the ADRC, among other things. So Mary, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's interesting to see the large number of overlaps between the various speakers and what they've told us, which is encouraging to me because I think that psychosocial interventions and supportive interventions are a crucial part of optimal care for people with dementia and their family members. So I am going to, in 10 minutes approximately, talk about more than 30 years worth of work, and started with the caregiver intervention at NYU, which was actually based on clinical experience. It turned into a research study, and then finally to a state-funded evidence-informed program that I now run. So the NYU caregiver intervention was actually formalized by me based on work that 4 social service trained people had been providing as volunteers at NYU to family caregivers. And when I met them, I thought what they were doing was likely to be helpful to caregivers and people with dementia. So I wrote a grant proposal that was funded back in 1987 and was funded for more than 20 years to evaluate what we call the NYU caregiver intervention. So it was an empirically based intervention. It was not based on a theory at first, although the stress process model, which was published a few years after we first got funded, seems to explain why it works, because it seems to help reduce the things that what are called mediators that interfere between, that create the higher likelihood of negative outcomes. So the NYU caregiver intervention is a multi-component intervention that includes counseling, support, and education. It includes, and I think this is unique to the interventions that have been studied long-term. It includes the family, not just the person with dementia, and it's individualized to the needs of each family. It emphasizes support for the primary family caregiver. As I said, it includes other family members. It's available when needed and as long as needed. And it's geared to the stage of dementia and the strengths and limitations of the person with dementia and the family caregivers. So this is a schematic that we developed to show what the intervention implementation process is. It starts with an intake assessment that's quite comprehensive. Then there's an individual counseling session with the primary caregiver, 4 family counseling sessions with other people in the family or people she calls thinks of or he thinks of as family members who he or she would like to have participate, and then a second individual session. And then there are follow-up sessions, which we originally did for research purposes in the original study, but we also heard from many caregivers that they found these follow-up sessions very helpful because they could get additional support and update the counselor about where they were and what was going on. So that they didn't see, even though it was a long assessment, they didn't see it as only for research, but they found it supportive as well. And we also provide what we called ad hoc phone consultation, which we realized after we started was a really important part of the intervention. So the caregiver and the family members in the treatment group were acquainted with a counselor, somebody they knew, who they could call when they needed additional help. So it was not a helpline because it was someone with whom they had previous experience. So over the 23 years that we evaluated the data, we enrolled 406 spouse caregivers over about 10 years. And we found that the intervention improved the well-being of family caregivers. In particular, it improved support for the caregivers, reduced caregiver depression, reduced caregiver stress reaction to the behaviors of the person with dementia, improved caregiver self-rated health. And because of those outcomes, it also, and most importantly from the funding perspective, I suppose, reduced nursing home placement, postponed nursing home placement for a very long period of time. Even after nursing home placement, the intervention, which may have been delivered, 6 counseling sessions, which may have been delivered as long as 18 years before, still had an impact on caregivers' depression and burden, and also during the bereavement process, it had an impact on depression. And importantly, the mediator of all the other outcomes is social support. And I think another important outcome was that during the period that we studied people, and some people were in the study, as I said, as long as 18 years, fewer than 5% dropped out while the person with dementia was still living at home, whether they were in the treatment group or the control group. Now, this is the graph that some people have used to compare to drugs, and shows that the time to nursing home placement of people with dementia, and this was a study that went on for 11.5 years of data, delayed the postponed nursing home placement for people in the treatment group, which is the green line, by about 1.5 years compared to the people in the control group, which is the red line, and the difference between them widened over time. And back in 2014, somebody asked me if they could do an economic model of what the healthcare cost savings in Minnesota would be if every caregiver in Minnesota got the NYU caregiver intervention. There are about 5.5 million people in the state of Minnesota, and they estimated that over 15 years, the state would save $996 million. And that factoid, not all the information about caregiver well-being and depression and stress and social support, that fact, the $996 million was the precipitator of the NYU caregiver intervention and other supportive programs in New York State. But before that, what did we do with all this information? We replicated the randomized control trial in many other communities around the country and in other countries. We provided the intervention through funding from what was then called the Administration on Aging. Now it's part of ACL, in community settings in many states. We expanded the evidence-based, which was originally spouse and partner caregivers, to adult child caregivers. And we developed and evaluated training in the NYU caregiver intervention. First, we published a book that was published by AMA Press, and then we developed online training and certification, which any one who wants to learn how to provide the intervention can take. More recently, we developed and presciently, before COVID, we developed a teleconferencing version of the NYU caregiver intervention, which is also being evaluated in a randomized controlled trial. And we use the social support paradigm for other interventions. For example, a couples counseling intervention that was funded by Zenith Award from the Alzheimer's Association and showed benefits for couples getting supportive intervention in a short 6 sessions with a trained counselor. We evaluated museum programs for people with dementia with their caregivers and demonstrated significant effects. And in 2011, I founded a chorus called the Unforgettables, which is still singing and rehearsing and giving concerts, hoping to give another concert soon. There are over 100 people participating in 2 choruses in New York right now. And as I said, we received funding in 2015 from New York State to provide free supportive services for family caregivers in New York City. There are 9 such programs and they cover the entire state, and we have 1. And it was an opportunity to provide the comprehensive counseling and support that we had been providing through research at no cost to dementia caregivers in New York City. We've helped about 1,500 caregivers so far. The support program includes consultation and support personalized to the needs of each caregiver, individual consultation, family consultation, ongoing support, access to the care team throughout the course of dementia, of caregiving, education, referrals to community services, and unique features such as a buddy program, which links people in the early stage of dementia as mentors to both healthcare students in healthcare fields and also to undergraduates now. A Place for Us, which is a community program for people in the early stage of dementia, and it's all at no cost. And we are linked to the CED program that provides services for patients, diagnostic evaluation and treatment, and also to the Alzheimer's Center. This is a schematic. And I think in a little bit of time I have left, I wanted to say that we have also actually increased our activity during COVID-19. And overnight, literally overnight, we turned our entire program into a video conferencing program because the need is greater than ever. The increased stress caused by worry about vulnerability to the disease and risk of serious illness, the physical isolation, the fact that people are unable or unwilling to have other paid help or family even in their homes often, the fact that community respite such as daycare centers and senior centers are closed. So it makes the program really even more important than ever. And we are now doing all of our services, including, believe it or not, the services for people in the early stages of dementia. And the chorus, which is affiliated with us, is rehearsing on Thursdays and Fridays, and more people are coming than ever before because it's more accessible on the internet to many people. We provide museum tours and memory cafes. And here is a picture of the early stage creative arts group that was taken by the leader, who is in the center on the top row. But these are participants who, either with the caregiver or without, or most of the time without the caregiver, are creating art together online through the funding for the Family Support Program.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Great. All right. So we got 5 minutes for discussion. And questions have been coming in and being answered. This is a cool way to do it. But those are 4 great talks. Thank you all. I want to just, with our couple minutes, actually 4 minutes, and I do want to try to end right on time. I think that we can make a really strong case for improving outcomes, improving our reach and our access to this type of care. And then doing it and reducing costs overall. But the hardest thing right now to do this is, in my opinion, is funding. And I'd love to know what you think in terms of barriers. What are the other big barriers? But then what are you doing about funding? Jim's got it really nice, huh? By getting the state. We're thinking about or trying to have inroads with our state. But if you don't have that, basically we're using philanthropy right now. What are you guys doing for funding, and how are you overcoming that big barrier?
Well, we've been lucky because we have the state grant, and because we were supposed to be, we've had it for 5 years. We were supposed to apply for another 5 years, but Cuomo gave us a 5+ year, an extra year now, and hopefully we'll continue to be funded, because I think it's clear that there's a need for programs like this until there's an effective drug that can stop dementia in its tracks.
Okay, great. So state funding also. Kate, how about you?
We're also grant funded. NIH and then some private foundations have recently funded us. Administration for Community Living, Merck Foundation. So we're just struggling to get by, trying to get buy-in from our medical center to sustain the program. I mean, ironically, it could be that Aducanumab's approved, and then that actually triggers our health systems to pay for this type of care, to navigate people through the pathway of figuring out if they're a candidate for the therapy, and to support them as they get on this medication that's potentially lucrative for the health system. Yeah. So I'm hoping that something like that will actually be an inroad into getting this better supportive care.
I agree, and that if there's more money in it, then I think health systems will step up. And then Jim made the point about how do we get this care, that the Aducanumab, if it's approved, out across our states or to our stakeholders in the region. So, and Jeff, you're doing the work to convince Medicare, where I think, we see the sort of ultimate lifeline being Medicare billing down the road, and are hoping that, Medicare comes around and continues to create funding streams for us to build these types of programs around. So do you have any thoughts?
Well, two thoughts. One is that, we're also working to scale this up in value-based care models. This is where there's a true win-win for all, for the patient, for the provider, for the health system to do interventions like this that are frankly a lot less expensive than $99,000. Yeah. But actually more effective. And then of course Medicare is looking to say, okay, perhaps many of the patients, like the ones we take care of, would say, I'll forego my ICU care if I can get help from my caregiver team now, at a lot less cost. And so I think that's where the conversation will be going in the future, in addition to all the other wonderful things that are being done to try to find a way to delay and prevent the disease.
Great. Well, Jeff, I think you're right that that Medicare is really the place where we have to push. So it's really hard when you're talking to primary care providers and you're trying to get them to adopt practices that are the best for our patients and their families. They don't have time and they're not going to get reimbursed for it. So you try and do everything you can to maximize their cost recovery for their activities, find new codes and pressure Medicare to pay for some of those things that are going to save them money down the road. And what Mary was showing about what convinced the state of New York to funnel money into the program is really where you have to go. You have to convince people that this is a fiscal sort of benefit to the state and to the Medicare and federal systems.
Agree. Showing that it's cost effective and that you can find an easy solution that doesn't add more work to the primary care doctors. I'm a geriatrician primary care. There's no margin. So you got to find ways to help them. And I think we can do that.
Well, years ago, we did a study in a community, in a group practice in Vermont. And the person who did it actually convinced the doctors that if she, who was a licensed clinical social worker, could sit in their suite, that she could save them more time by doing supportive intervention like ours, and it would be worth their time. They were so convinced in the end, after they did the pilot study, that they let her have the space rent-free because she was providing services. And the way it is, licensed clinical social workers make a lot less money than physicians, and they can devote more time.
Totally agree, Mary. We need to congeal our efforts here.
Yeah, so great. Well, it's an exciting area. Some of us are new to it, and so you guys, many are all veterans and are paving the way for us. So appreciate your time and the presentations. And sorry we got to cut it off, but the clinical core is going to keep doing these kinds of webinars to really try to stimulate growth. This actually is the second of the webinars. We did the social determinants of health just a few months ago. So building on that experience. So anyway, appreciate it. And thank you all for attending, and thanks for the presentations.
Thanks, everyone.